as much as we can, and we'd love to have your feedback on what you're hearing today, anything that you need clarification on. We're happy to address all of those. We've got folks waiting to answer you in the chat. We'll bring some of those into the room. Today, or this afternoon, we're really excited about talking to you about workforce flexibility and especially addressing some of the audiences that have been underserved by VDI solutions in the past. So I'm happy to welcome Hassan Taff from the AWS EUC organization. He leads part of the product management team there, and Stefan Verdi from Canonical, who's a senior solution architect there. Guys, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Robbie. So yeah, as Robbie was mentioning, today we had an incredible slate on some of the launches that we have done. Earlier, Munir and Alex and Sean, we talked about enabling workforce flexibility. We talked about WorkSpaces Core, how it's bridging the gap between the traditional VDI and the cloud. Then we talked about Ubuntu. Alex was able to speak in depth about why it's so important for organizations to have a wide variety of choice and flexibility. And then we had some cool announcements related to Zoom as well. So I think today what I wanted to cover a lot is how the workforce has shifted in the past few years. And as Munir was saying earlier, that the future of workforce is now. It is happening today. We are going to talk a lot about what we are doing here at End User Computing in terms of solving some of those IT challenges through our set of services. Then we are going to go a little bit deeper into what Ubuntu does. Stefan here, my colleague, is going to speak about open source in the enterprise, some of the challenges that enterprise face in terms of adopting open source, and then how does Ubuntu solve some of those challenges. I think a lot of the value of open source comes in terms of lower cost, more flexibility, better management, which is a very well aligned with what we are trying to do here at End User Computing. So without further ado, let's jump into it. I think that what happened with the global pandemic is that most organizations were forced to switch into a mode where they had to quickly move tons and tons of their users from corporate offices, physical offices, to their home office. And when we talk about this kind of shift in workforce, obviously we can imagine it creates a lot of challenges for the IT, or it did at least. But as the organizations have moved with their end users in terms of enabling productivity for them, at the same time, the way that people have been doing work has changed as well. Now the workforce wants to work from anywhere. They want to be working remote sometimes. They want to be in office sometimes. Sometimes the workforce is in different time zone. And ultimately, from an organizational standpoint, it has brought a lot of flexibility on where they hire their workforce at, and how they keep them productive no matter where they are. In fact, I will share some of the key insights that PwC talked about. They did an interview with a bunch of execs from different companies, and they found out that 72% of the leaders in organizations, they want to enable their workforce wherever they are by investing in tooling that is more that meets the user where they are, rather than trying to get the user to what IT can support. So that's a major shift. If you look at some of the other things that has happened is that IT still needs to maintain a high level of security. That thing is not going anywhere. They still want the solutions to be highly reliable. Because anything that is not reliable ends up in lost productivity for the end users, which in turn ends up in a lost productivity for the organization. And finally, they want to do all of this at justifiable cost. They don't want costs to go through the roof. They want to manage them. They want to optimize some of those costs. So I think that to kind of wrap this whole conversation into sort of a summary, we strongly believe that the hybrid work model is here to stay. And we also believe that organizational needs of the future and today require more flexibility. They require more services that can serve their use cases. So for example, some of the use cases for organizations could be merger and acquisition. Hey, we acquired a company, we got to get those users into our IT systems, we got to get them started fast. Similarly, if we look at the overall workforce, the workforce is extremely diverse. Some of the end users are just doing office work in terms of operating some business processes. Some other workforce is focused on marketing. Some other workforce is focused on engineering, right? I think ultimately it all comes down to that end user needs to be productive. And earlier today, Alex was talking about that, hey, in end user computing, it's all about the end user. That's where IT needs to meet them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the diversity of the workforce and how we are going to enable it. But before I get there, I think it's very important to understand how AWS services are evolving with the needs of our customers. And if you look, a few years back, maybe 2-3 decades ago, every person had a physical device. Every person has a laptop that they need to get their job done. If you look at some of the challenges as we are talking about, evolution of workspace or flexibility, it takes tremendous amount of effort to, patch, update, and even ship a laptop. I remember in my early days of working, it took me like 1 week at least to get a new laptop after joining a company. Took another week to make sure that it's set up, it is connected to all the websites I want to access, it has all the development tools that I want to work on. So that's like 2 weeks. It's quite a bit of time by which time you're actually starting to get your work done. Then came the advent of VDI. Like, hey, let's virtualize this infrastructure, let's make it faster, let's make it more secure, let's make it more reliable, right? But some of the challenges we see there is, okay, there's quite a bit of upfront investment, we got to set up our data center, we got to do all of that legwork to get started. So the problem now became from the agility of the end user to be more focused on how does the IT team get started faster, right? So we came up with like, hey, let's build some cloud VDI cloud desktops with Amazon WorkSpaces. So we are really reducing that initial setup time. And with WorkSpaces, we were able to essentially reduce that 2-week time window that I was talking about to a matter of minutes. You join a new company, you get a workspace in 20-30 minutes, boom, you're ready to go. The cool thing about it is that once you have prepared your workspace image, it's well integrated with your tools, it has all the permissions set up. The end user doesn't have to do a lot of that work. So what we did is, with all of these family of services, what we started to do is expand. We started to broaden our horizon in terms of providing IT as much choice as they need. I think that earlier Munir was mentioning that 90% of our roadmap is determined by our customers. We work with our customers to determine what they need, and that's what we go and build. So over the course of few years, we have built workspaces, which are cloud desktops. We built WorkSpaces Core, which was a cool announcement today that bridges the gap between the traditional VDI and the cloud desktop. We also launched WorkSpaces Web to provide customers with a simple browser that their end users who are just doing work on the web can get access to. And I think the broad theme of all of our services are that security, reliability, and the scalability are table stakes. We don't want to ship anything, as weird as it sounds, that doesn't have these core components that come out of the box with the service, right? And then we are talking about pay-as-you-go. The cool thing about that is with any cloud service, especially with AWS, there's no need to spend tons of CapEx and try to do a lot of upfront investment. You get started, you give your user desktops or apps, you charge them for what they're doing. I think going to the next layer of the development, as I was mentioning, it's all about the end user. So we talk about, hey, how can we make the end user experience extremely delightful? So they are very productive. They feel happy when they're running with our services. So hence we focused a lot on workspaces, end user experience. Earlier we had the announcement with VMware, how we are making that transition so easy for the users, especially the end users, that they don't feel something has changed, even though for the IT, they have materially optimized their backend and their infrastructure. So I think going a little bit deeper into the security angle, one of the things that we have heard from our customers time and time again is, hey, we need these things out of the box. We don't want to go and figure out how to get PCI compliant if you're a financial sector customer. We don't want to worry about HIPAA compliance if I'm in the healthcare industry. We don't want to worry about SOC and whatnot. So we paid a lot of attention to make sure that our services have these kind of compliance mechanisms already baked in, so customers don't have to do all of that heavy lifting. And again, this is not just about the hardening of the service. We provide tools to the IT admin to harden the security. So we talk about, hey, how do we authenticate a user? Or what tools does an IT admin need to secure an end user access to their workspaces environment? We talk about remoting protocol, like how is that stream hardened from a security standpoint? And then, at the end of the day, data protection is king. So how do we make sure that the data in a customer VPC in their cloud environment is well secure, has the proper guardrails, and can't proliferate? So now I'm going to talk a little bit about Ubuntu desktops. So as I was mentioning earlier, IT has a diverse set of needs. We also talked about how long it takes for IT admins to get end users started. We also talked about security quite a bit. We also talked about flexibility and choice. Now, I think the problem, this problem actually magnifies when we are talking about our developers and engineers user base. Because imagine if a developer has to wait 2 weeks just to get their work started. That's quite a bit of loss in terms of productivity. But at the same time, it's a big loss for the end user, because they are probably pissed that why do I have to wait so much to get started with my work? Same thing, we can talk about security here, that the code base that the developers are operating they are valuable, that's valuable IP property of any company. So how do we harden that? And then we thought, like, hey, what's the best way to enable our developer end users? Well, what could be better than giving them Ubuntu desktops, which is the most popular Linux distribution in a lot of companies where developers are coding on Ubuntu. It's a familiar interface for them. Their tools are already supported by Ubuntu, whether they're using Zscaler or AWS SDK or DevTools. All of them are already well integrated with Ubuntu. So super excited about this launch of Ubuntu WorkSpaces. Has been pretty frequent asks from our end customers on enabling their developer workforce. And I think the main value that it's built on Amazon Workspaces, you get all the cool things that Workspaces already provides with high productivity, better cost management for IT to optimize their costs, hardened security, and of course, high reliability. We actually have a 99.9% uptime SLA, which is financially backed, meaning that, hey, if our service goes down, we are going to pay you money for the outages. So this is very unique to AWS in the industry. So I think that I talked a little bit about developers, but let's take a look at what other users you can enable with it. Obviously, developers is a big scenario, but Ubuntu is not just for developers. We have developers that obviously work with Ubuntu already, and now they can get a virtualized desktop much faster to get their job done. But there are other use cases. There's data scientists, people who are doing high performance computing, who are sifting through gazillions of data every day just to kind of do their job very well. I think one cool thing that I'll share from my personal experience is sometimes I play around with developer tools and I'm like, hey, I need to compile this code, or I need to run this data science job. The cool thing with Workspaces is I run that job, I leave my desktop, I go eat, grab my coffee, because a lot of these processes take sometimes an hour or 2 hours to get done. But I don't need to continuously press a button to keep my computer awake, and it's I come back from my coffee break or whatever, and okay, my compile job is done. Great. So I think that's a personal experience that I wanted to share, which is I think incredible that end users can get it. And finally, I'll talk about engineering and task workers. I think engineering, as very similar to data scientists, very similar to developers. We have MATLAB that works pretty well with Ubuntu. We have tons of other engineering software that people can leverage with Ubuntu. And task worker, that's like one of the unique use cases here that we work on, where you don't have a necessary dependency of application on Windows or any other operating system. So maybe you are using a web app. Maybe you're a call center user who just needs access to a browser and a bunch of other tools like notes and for taking notes, calendars, things like that. Very cool use case. So I will share some of our customers. They have built so crisp like integration to within the Linux ecosystem where they can really fine-tune the image to their type of task worker. We're talking about calendaring sync. We're talking about messengers and whatnot. So all of these users, as we were talking, they want to be able to work from anywhere. They don't want to be tied to location A, location B. They want to be able to get their job done wherever they are, whenever they are. I think one of the cool things that we're going to enable with Ubuntu is the AI ML. That's one of the things that I'm really excited about. We have a lot of customers who want to build their software that does AI and ML. So I think with that, Stephen, wanted to give the mic to you and tell us a little bit about open source and enterprise and how Canonical takes care of it.
Thank you, Hassan. So my name is Stefan Verdi. I'm a senior solution architect with Canonical. Canonical is the company behind Ubuntu. And today I'm going to talk about two things. Number one, I'm going to talk about the benefits of open source in the enterprise and also the challenges inherent to adopting open source in the enterprise. So, if I hadn't had to do this talk 10 years ago, it would have been more of a challenge, right? But nowadays, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, right? Today, 90% of DevOps teams view open source as really important, and then over 60% of businesses increase their open source investment over the last year. So open source adoption is growing tremendously fast in the enterprise. Why is that? The reason is because there are multiple benefits. So first, open source is the platform for innovation. All of the innovators today, be they large company or small startups or in academia, they use open source. They contribute to open source, deploy, test, debug open source software. So open source software is really where you'll see all of the innovation, the latest tools, frameworks are available in open source. And what that means for enterprises is that they can leverage that open source ecosystem, and it means they can develop at a lower cost and faster and higher quality software. So why lower cost? Well, because open source is mostly free, right? So they can leverage the existing ecosystem instead of starting from scratch, instead of reinventing the wheel. They can stand on the shoulders of giants, like Newton said, right? And the fact that they don't have to start from scratch means the development cycle is very fast. Open source practices are excellent these days. Code quality is excellent. Velocity is really, really high. Now, I'm painting a very optimistic picture here, so you must be wondering, is it all good or are there some challenges? Well, there are some challenges, right? So what are the challenges? Well, I think the main one is open source is heterogeneous, right? So it's tens of thousands of projects, and each project gets to decide their own governance, their own processes, their own cadence, right? And so when you want to consume that software, you end up with a patchwork of things that come with usually no SLA, right? And in the next slide, I'll go over why we think Ubuntu can help with that. So we believe Ubuntu is the trusted conduit for open source usage in the enterprise. Why is that? So, there are different personas. Hassan talked about some of them. And I'm going to describe for each persona what benefits they can yield from Ubuntu. So first, developers. Developers, the main benefit is that when they develop on Ubuntu, they get the luxury to also deploy the software they developed also on Ubuntu. So regardless of whether they want to deploy on servers or on the cloud or on IoT devices at the edge, all of these, the substrate will be the same. The substrate is different, but the OS and the platform will be the same. It's Ubuntu. So you can develop, deploy, do CI on your software on Ubuntu WorkSpaces, and then deploy that in production on any substrate you want. That's a huge benefit. Data scientists, they also benefit from Ubuntu. Ubuntu is essentially today the incumbent platform for data science. When you Google pretty much anything about a data science, AI, ML framework, the first answer is probably going to be, hey, here's how I do it on Ubuntu. So it gives you a lot of access to latest and greatest software, obviously, right? You get access to all of NVIDIA, CUDA, Rapids tool, and so on, right? And over and beyond NVIDIA, other vendors target Ubuntu primarily. And then you get that velocity because everybody else, the entire development ecosystem is on Ubuntu. And so this is where you're going to get the most help from the rest of the community. Now, we talked about developers. Actually, if you slip back to the previous slide, Hassan, we talked about developers and data scientists, but they're not the only people involved here. IT admins are super important because they're going to be the ones who have to deploy these systems, right? And so essentially, what Ubuntu offers to IT administrators is integration with Active Directory. And in the enterprise today, Active Directory is used very widely for doing user authentication and also computer management. And in Ubuntu 22.04, we have integration with Active Directory. So users can authenticate to Ubuntu WorkSpace with their AD credentials, and administrators can configure some of the Ubuntu WorkSpace properties via AD. So that's really good. And then last but not least, security teams, right? So security is crucial. Again, we talk about development, the crown jewel of the enterprise, like where the IP is, you don't want that to leak out, right? And you also want the software that's developed by the developers to be deployable and maintainable, right? That's super important. Again, remember the open source projects, there are patchwork of projects with different sort of SLAs. The benefit of consuming open source software from Ubuntu repositories is that you get a guarantee homogeneity. You get that predictability that you're going to get 10 years of support and 10 years of patching. So whenever there's a critical CVE, regardless of which package it impacts in the Ubuntu repos, it is going to get fixed. And that is really, really important. So the version of Ubuntu in Ubuntu WorkSpace is actually Ubuntu Pro. And what that means is that you get 10 years of maintenance and security updates for that software, as well as the width of updates for the entire Ubuntu repository, so the main repository universe. We're talking about over 40,000 packages here. Another aspect of security is, in specific verticals, finance, healthcare, there are specific regulations like, HIPAA in healthcare. For government, FIPS, for instance. So Ubuntu comes with a lot of certification. You can be FIPS compliant, CIS compliant, and so on. There are a lot of hardening tools. So that makes the job of security teams much easier. All right, so next I wanted to talk quickly about some verticals. In automotive, we see a lot of Ubuntu usage, mostly for doing AI, right? Self-driving, things like that, right? Government is also a very strong pocket of Ubuntu usage. Again, Ubuntu can be secured, hardened to meet government mandates. So that makes it a really easy, platform to deploy. Financial, pretty much the same thing. A lot of security requirements. Ubuntu is really the best OS. Finance are early adopters of technology, and they also love the fact that we have the best tools and framework in Ubuntu. Healthcare and academic, again, pretty much the same story. For healthcare, HIPAA is a really strong regulation that you can meet thanks to Ubuntu security certifications. And in the academic world, it's really just the open source. They love the fact that there is no cost, no need to track licenses either. That's not a financial cost, but that's certainly a huge cost. And they contribute heavily to open source. Over to you, Hassan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stefan. That was very insightful. I think that I just wanted to share a little bit on, we have tremendous amount of customers who are already using workspaces. We see some of the name brands here, with Maximus, Fox, and you see a logo there that is Amazon. So the unique thing is that one of the largest customer of workspaces is Amazon IT. So I think all of these large organizations, they already love how they're able to enable their workforce with workspaces. And now with Ubuntu, I think they're going to love that they can expand their workspaces usage to even more developers and more data scientists. So I will share, this question I get asked a lot, like, hey, okay, you guys launched it. How do I get started? I think that it's super easy to get started. You go into the AWS console, select Workspaces, and you can go launch Ubuntu WorkSpaces desktops starting now. One of the cool thing we have done is we have launched a new free tier offer with Ubuntu WorkSpaces. That offer provides any customer, any user with 5 Ubuntu performance bundle workspaces for up to 500 hours. And it comes with 80 gigabytes in the root volume and 50 in the user volume. And yeah, so there's literally no cost for you to go and start trying it out, see if it works. And if you think that, hey, this is something I want to talk to AWS about and deploy a large-scale deployment for my end users, our AWS account reps and sales is simply a call or an email away. So do get started today, and we would love to hear feedback, both on the product as well as on some of the cool announcements we have made today. We'll also share that one of my colleagues is going to talk a little bit in depth about how we are focusing on the builders. AWS focuses a lot on builder experience, and Gekai, who's one of our colleagues, is going to talk about that at a later session. So stay tuned for that.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Hassan. Thank you, Stefan, so much for being here with us today. Lots of really great information shared. And as Hassan was mentioning, the way to get started is not only easy for you, but it's also at no cost with that free tier. So you can definitely go to aws.amazon.com/workspaces/pricing, and you'll see the details there on how to actually get started. A bit of a mouthful, but make sure, again, our team in the Twitch and the LinkedIn Live chat channels can post that URL for you. But what a great opportunity to get started really at no barrier to entry, and you can get your hands on some of these services today to try them out, to test them, to, as Hassan mentioned, play around with them a little bit when you're on your coffee break or grabbing some lunch. So a nice way to get into the platform and try it yourself. So as often, or as we know, we've got a handful of questions that we're seeing come through. So we definitely want to be able to ask you guys a few that are coming in, if you're up for it. Yeah. Let me get into my notes here. So one question that we do hear often is just kind of helping to reiterate and clarify for those IT admins and really addressing scale. I love that here at AWS and of course with Amazon, we kind of drink our own champagne. We use our services just as much as we want to promote them to our own developer and IT audiences. But I think it's a valid question that we get about, as an IT admin, what insight can you provide in terms of the Ubuntu for Amazon Workspaces and actually using it at scale? What insight can you provide for that team?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as Holly mentioned, we drink our own champagne, and Amazon, as a customer, they give us very honest and upfront feedback. We have sort of a zero filter kind of feedback that we get from them, which is tremendously valuable for us. I think everybody knows Amazon is a company of very large scale. So we have hundreds of thousands of users that run on workspaces. But going back to your question, I think that as an IT admin, the key things that you need to keep in mind is the service that you're choosing. I think that's the first most important thing, that the service that you're choosing meets your security standards, meets your dev tooling requirements. It can be integrated with your existing company tools like Active Directory, as Stefan was mentioning. And I think the best piece with workspaces is you get all of those out of the box. So when we talk about dev tooling integration, we do so much work with AWS development teams and Amazon development teams to make sure that, hey, these tools work very well, right? And then we talk about integration with existing tools. We use in Ubuntu SSSD, which is what connects with the Active Directory. All of that heavy lifting, we do it here in the service team. So for an IT admin, what they should be thinking about in terms of scale up is, hey, what are my tools I want to be integrated? That's number one. Like, how am I going to integrate with my existing tooling? Number two is this image that I'm providing for my devs. What parts of that image are company determined? For example, hey, we don't want to put in unsecure software on my image and things like that. So what is the company's policy in terms of the image customization? And then the third thing to think about is what the end user is going to customize on their boxes, right? Because you also want to have some level of control on, hey, you don't go install malware on your boxes, for example. So I think that how we enable it, and I know I intentionally left security out, but it's not because it's not important, it's because that just comes out of the box. It's already very hardened from a security standpoint. So for an IT admin, the experience becomes more like, hey, I'm going to focus on preparing this golden image that my company security policies, they meet the company's security policy. Now that you have this image, now it's all about firing workspaces, as many as you want. So you can, I was telling earlier, we have customers who fire up 10,000 workspaces in a matter of hour, just because they have the need to scale up that fast, right? But it's the same image, rinse and repeat again and again. But for the IT admin, they're not managing those 10,000 boxes. They're just managing, hey, what this image needs to look like, right? And then from the end user, they're customizing, but security can always put policies and guardrails on, hey, this is how much I'm going to allow. And especially in developers, they have a lot of allowed tools since they're going deep into their development. But this is the key piece that gets simplified with workspaces for an IT admin, that your management is not about how many end users you have. Your management is about what each end user environment should look like.
That's great. And I think one of the things that I love most about AWS is we've got this massive group of developers, like not only the people that are developing our services and developing things that we use, but also people that are building their own tools, that are building, like, we are here to empower builders. Yeah. And we've heard this constantly from that group of folks, that they want this Ubuntu integration with workspaces. Why Ubuntu on workspaces as opposed to just running it locally on a laptop or on a developer system at home or in the office?
Yeah, I think I'm going to share a little bit of insight, and Stefan was talking about it earlier. It's about the development environment, right? So imagine you are a developer at a company and you have to write code on EC2 with Ubuntu running your application, yep. Right? Now, if the end user is, let's suppose, coding in Windows or any other OS, there's a high degree of chances that code might have some issues when you actually go deploy it for your app in your actual production environment, right? So your DevOps is going to increase. Your cost of DevOps is going to increase. And we talk about these days CI/CD pipelines, like, hey, it's continuously being integrated. And the problem now becomes more magnified. Like, now we are not talking about one developer, we are talking about 10,000 of those people, right? So you have this constant stream of code that is coming onto that production environment. So what's important in this scenario? In this scenario, what's important for the end user, that when I compile my code, hey, please run, in my production environment. Don't give me a bunch of debugging logs for me to sift through and figure out where this dependency was missing, or this dependency tree was missing, hence my code or binary didn't compile well. So I think that's the core reason, that your developer is coding on the workspace in the exact same environment that that code is going to go to the web application environment on EC2, for example. I think the second piece that is important here is a lot of these compile jobs are massive. We are talking about code compilation that could take 4 or 5 hours, sometimes even more, right? If you have a, let's suppose, for argument, if you have a laptop and now you're deploying that code to EC2, what's the bottleneck here? It's your internet connection. You're going to have to throw all of that thing to go to the AWS EC2, do the compilation, and whatnot. Now with WorkSpaces, you have EC2 instance sitting here, and WorkSpaces server is also sitting next to it. And you know what? They're connected with the AWS Backbone Fabric, which is extremely high bandwidth. So you can do the math that now your code compilation speed is not your ISP's bandwidth speed. You are doing compilation on a local area network, essentially, right? Yeah. So I think those are the 2 points I'll share. But Stefan, what do you think?
I think you covered it very well, Hassan. Like the ecosystem, maybe I would mention, it's the biggest ecosystem of open source software out there. And it comes, again, with the guarantee that you're going to get predictability of getting 10 years of updates.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we hear most from customers is they love to experiment. And we love it. We love it here at AWS too. Like, we love to try things, see if they work. Fail fast is sort of our methodology there, and then learn, keep going. And when we think about doing these things in an environment like WorkSpaces, it's really cost effective to try something and see if it works. Like, spin these up, use the free tiers, try this thing out. If it works, great, scale it up. If it doesn't, try something different. And you've not invested in a bunch of hardware to run this and those kinds of things. And you have a lot of different choices. Like, you could run these things on anything from a really low-end processor with a little bit of RAM and all these different configuration options, all the way up to like high-end GPUs and things like that. And you have access to those things on a pay-as-you-go basis, as opposed to having to spend tens of thousands of dollars sometimes to build these big systems. So I think this is a really cool option for developers, particularly to have that access to all these different kinds of resources.
Yeah, and Robbie, I would add, I think you touched upon an amazing point, the experimentation. We talked a lot about organizations, we talked a lot about large scale. But think about startups. Think about this developer. Like Stefan was mentioning, startups is all developers, because first you are building a product that you can actually sell, right? It's so easy. Like, a developer can come up with an idea that, hey, I'm gonna write the next next version of live streaming service or whatever that is, right? It's incredibly easy for startups with no upfront cost, because obviously startups want to put their money in development of the product and not necessarily on other expenses, right? So I think that's so important that small companies, individual developer users, come up with an idea, go experiment it, build your code on AWS, and hey, try selling some products.
It's so exciting. I mean, we heard earlier this morning about the flexibility and the choice. I think this is just a fine-tooth comb on exactly that point. So as we've mentioned, check out Ubuntu today. Get started. I'm kind of seeing in the chat too questions about if anyone's already tried it so far. So keep us posted. If you're having some ability today to check it out, post in the chat and let us know what you think about it. It'll be kind of some real-time feedback through the launch. But again, this idea of flexibility and choice is really coming through today with a lot of the EUC services available at our fingertips, and it's very exciting. And I will say too, we are kind of covering the use cases and topics that you can dive into deeper, but keep with us because later this afternoon, we're actually going to do what we call a technical deep dive and get into the mechanics of what this actually means, what it means to you as a developer, the impacts it's going to have on your teams. That's later this afternoon. We still have a handful, a few sessions to keep you informed and posted on more topics. But this one particularly, again, we've got planned a technical deep dive for those that are wanting to stick around and again, dive a little deeper with us.
Yeah, so for those of you who are sitting out there going, where are my demos? We've got demos
We got
coming,
them.
I promise. So stay tuned. We'll have those. We've got still, as Holly said, lots and lots of content coming for you. So stick with us.